Hello, it's The Week in Art. I'm Ben Luke. In this episode, a big week in London. Kerry James Marshall at the Royal Academy, the National Gallery's plans to extend its building and collection, and Picasso's Three Dancers at Tate Modern.
Here's the truth about AI. AI is only as powerful as the platform it's built into. ServiceNow puts AI to work for people across your business, removing friction and frustration for your employees, supercharging productivity for your developers, providing intelligent tools for your service agents to make customers happier. All built into a single platform you can use right now. That's why the world works with ServiceNow. Visit servicenow.com/UK/AI for people.
Had one of those days, London?
Are you okay?
When you just need some good vibes, we've got you. Because with award-winning Sky shows like Mr. Big Stuff,
We're coming for you.
Robin Romesh versus
I feel like it's a punishment. Either way, I'm in.
Brassic,
I've heard a lot about you.
and brand new US comedies Ted, Hacks, and The Paper, you can deal with anything the day throws at you.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Sky, believe in better.
Kerry James Marshall, the Histories at the Royal Academy of Arts in London, is the largest ever European retrospective of the work of the US artist and has been greeted with universal critical acclaim. I take a tour of the exhibition with Mark Godfrey, its curator, and visit a related exhibition of Marshall's graphic novel project Rythm Mastr at the Tabernacle in Notting Hill in West London with the co-curator of that show with Godfrey, Nikita Sena Quarshie. Last week, the National Gallery in London announced that it will build a major new extension at a cost of around £400 million, of which £375 million has already been raised. Project Domani, as it's called, is billed by the National as the largest transformation since its formation 200 years ago. The art newspaper's digital editor, Alexander Morrison, talks to the director of the National Gallery, Gabriele Finaldi. And this episode's Work of the Week is The Three Dancers by Pablo Picasso, one of the greatest of all the many thousands of works by the Spanish artist. The painting was made in 1925, and Tate Modern is celebrating its centenary with an exhibition, Theatre Picasso, in which The Three Dancers is the centrepiece. I talked to Natalia Sidlina, the co-curator of the exhibition, and to Enrique Fuenteblanca, who, with the artist Wu Sang, has designed the radical staging of the exhibition. Before all that, a reminder of our subscription offer. As the academic year restarts, we have a new student subscription. Stay connected to the art world from your first lecture to your final dissertation with a 3-year student subscription to the art newspaper for just £99, $112 or €105. Gift, quarterly and annual subscriptions are also available. There's a link in the show notes. Please also subscribe to this podcast and our sister podcast, A Brush With, wherever you're listening, and do give us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. And a reminder that my new book featuring 25 interviews from the A Brush With podcast, as well as new texts, has just been published. It's called What is Art For? Contemporary Artists on Their Influences, Inspirations and Disciplines. It's published by Henny and priced $39.95 or £29.95. Now, despite being universally regarded as one of the greatest living painters, Kerry James Marshall has had relatively few solo exhibitions in London, the most notable being his revelatory show at the Camden Arts Centre 20 years ago. But the biggest ever exhibition of his work in Europe opens this weekend at the Royal Academy of Arts in the UK capital, before travelling next year to the Kunsthaus Zurich and the Musée d'Art Moderne in Paris. It features more than 70 works, most of them paintings, by Marshall, who was born in 1955 in Birmingham, Alabama, and now lives in Chicago. Made across 5 decades, they reflect a career whose mission, as the curator Mark Godfrey puts it in the exhibition's excellent catalogue, has been, quote, to glean knowledge in order to make masterful, authoritative paintings that unequivocally centred black subjects. It does this through 11 cycles of work, among them a suite of entirely new paintings addressing the role of African people in the transatlantic slave trade. I went to the Academy, where Godfrey took me on a tour of the show, and then visited a related exhibition focusing on Marshall's graphic novel Rythm Mastr at the Tabernacle in Notting Hill, where I spoke to Godfrey's co-curator, Nikita Sena Quarshie. Mark, before we talk about individual works, could you set the scene for how this show came together? Because we've seen Kerry James Marshall shows in the UK, but nothing on this scale, right?
Yes, so I started working on the show a while back, but proposed it to the Royal Academy in 2021. And when that got green lit, I really started to think about the shape of the exhibition. And with the idea of the Academy and the architecture of the Royal Academy in mind, Kerry is a rare artist today in his interest in the tradition of the Academy. He famously wanted to learn how to make paintings, and he wanted to study from the history of art, looking at, what Leonardo did in the studio. And he trained with Charles White, who was an artist in the 70s in LA who took the academic tradition very seriously. So the exhibition really thinks about that from the very beginning and starts with a painting of his called The Academy, and a room that features paintings of artists in the studio and also people looking at art in a place like the Royal Academy.
It's really important, isn't it, that he's an artist who thinks a great deal about art in terms of its making across time, but also its situation within the world. He thinks about that a great deal, and he makes paintings about it, right?
Absolutely. And I think, in terms of its making across time, he feels that to make important art, you need to understand how others have made art before. How Fra Angelico made an Annunciation painting, or how Velázquez composed Las Meninas, or how Seurat made some of the great paintings, for instance, the Grand Jatte painting that Kerry visits in the Art Institute of Chicago regularly. But as you said, he's also thinking about the place of art in the world he lives in, and it's important for him to think about the experience of Black Americans and the politics and the realities of the world in which he lives.
Indeed. And one of the pictures in this room is a very grand scale portrait in which we see a museum space in which lots of black people are looking at artworks. And that is significant in so many different ways, isn't it? Because he's grappling with what it is to make work for an audience on the one hand, but he's also talking about what kind of work impacts those audiences. And he thinks a lot about that, doesn't he? He's toyed with abstraction. He's made works which directly reference why he is a figurative painter, for instance.
He does. And the painting that you're looking at, one of the things that fascinates me is that it's called underpainting, and it's in these sepia tones, and it's sort of deliberately left in a state of incompletion. So on the one hand, you're looking at a painting where black school children are looking at grand art in a grand museum. And an innocent way to look at this painting is to just think that it may connect to a memory that he has of being taken to the LA County Museum of Art to look at paintings when he was a school child and just to be very impressed by them. But the fact that the painting is an underpainting that's not finished, it makes one have to question, is this a scene that is likely nowadays? Is it unlikely? What makes people feel welcome in a space to look at art? What makes people feel that they can participate or feel excluded from such a space? And I think the painting is so clever because it sets up those questions.
Absolutely. And one thing it's also important to say, I think, is he's a very playful painter. He deals with extremely important subjects a lot, but he's deeply playful. And one of the ways in which he is most playful is in his Untitled Painter paintings, which are portraits of artists. And in those, you can see he's enjoying depicting an artist, but also playing around with what paint is, playing around with abstraction and figuration and so on.
I mean, when he started out as an artist, there were many black artists who were working in abstraction. And he always thought that abstraction wasn't a fully proper way to be a black artist, that a black artist need to unashamedly feature and center the black figure. So when you see these great paintings of black painters in the studio, what you're mainly looking at is their palettes with all sorts of drips of paint and circles of paint. It's essentially an abstraction within a figurative painting, and that is part of the playfulness. But there's another part of the playfulness that Nikita spotted when we were hanging the show, which is very, very tiny within the painting of the female painter, which is that her fingernail is painted red, black and green. And so it's a nice kind of precursor of the end of the show, which is a room called Red, Black and Green.
Now, in order to understand where his approach to figuration comes from, we're standing in front of a work that he himself says in the catalogue to the show that it's a degree zero painting for him. It's called Portrait of the Artist as a Shadow of His Former Self. It's a tiny picture, actually, but its importance is massive.
Yeah, so Kerry in the 1970s, I think, was kind of learning from his teacher, for instance, Charles White, and there were other teachers as well. He was also looking at the work of Romare Bearden and making collages, but figuring out what he would do that would be original and new. And he began to also think how painting could function on a conceptual level as well as a visual level. And after lots of thinking, he came up with this painting, which is made in egg tempera. Very traditional medium that is famously associated with Sienese painters in the 14th, 15th centuries, but had 20th century practitioners as well, like Ben Shahn. But he studied the how to make an egg tempera painting, and then made a work which purports to be a self-portrait, but it doesn't look like what he used to look like. It's more a conceptual game about a presentation of the artist. And it's one of the paintings where he set the figure, the very black figure, against almost black ground, so that the figure is both very present and almost invisible at the same time. And that kind of visual and intellectual idea came out of his thinking about Ralph Ellison's idea of invisible man. Ellison had published the novel in 1952 and thought of the condition of black people in the States as being invisible because they are sort of clearly present but not looked at or spoken to or considered to have feelings, political opinions, and so on. So with that in mind, Kerry came up with this visual idea of a black figure against the black ground.
And it's important in his whole project because one of the things he's doing is thinking about blackness in relation to art and the representation of black people within art, both historically and now, right?
Yes, I mean, he's very aware that black bodies have featured in art since the earliest artists that he's interested in, like Giotto, for instance. In Padua, in the chapel, there's a black figure in one of the frescoes there. He's very aware that there will be black figures in various adorations of the Magi scenes. But there's never been a tradition of painting where black people figure very large and prominently in sort of history paintings and in paintings of everyday life. And so, noting that absence, he's always set himself the task to make these grand paintings that feature black people.
And one of the ways he does explore that is through the use of different kinds of black paint, isn't it? And we've got the Invisible Man painting called The Invisible Man on the other side of this same room. And one of the things that you see through, especially through the portraits and so on, is that he's taking black paint to represent the skin of black people, but he is using multiple blacks, and there's a sort of reflection of the multitudinous nature of black identity and black experience.
Sure, I think there's two important points to make. The first is that he never tries to approximate the colours of black people's actual skin. So you don't see skin tones, you don't see a range of browns. He paints black people with black paint because he wants black to figure rhetorically in a painting, just like it figures rhetorically in political speech when black people call themselves black.
Yeah.
But the blacks that he uses in these paintings is not one black. He will use a combination of Mars black, ivory black, and various other black pigments. And sometimes he'll couple those or mix them with cobalt blues and others. And he thinks that black needs to become fully chromatic in his paintings so that there's a kind of complexity and nuance to those blacks, even while they never look like actual skin tones.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really important that you say he uses it rhetorically, but importantly, he says again in the catalogue, he does not use it metaphorically. He's interested in the fact of blackness, he says.
Yeah, and that fact is, a physical fact. When you're looking at one of the very many big paintings that we have here in the Royal Academy, it's a prominent physical fact in front of you, and it's powerful physically to look at these paintings.
Indeed it is. Let's go to the next one. One of the things I'm really struck by walking around the show with you, Mark, is that we are very much in a Royal Academy show. And I mean that in the best sense, in the sense that you've used these spaces, the grandeur of these spaces, to really reflect why Kerry James Marshall is such an important painter. And I'm conscious of that in one of these biggest galleries. It's the signature gallery, actually, of the Royal Academy spaces. And these works are vast. They're like the grand machine of 19th century painting, and that is no accident, is it?
Absolutely not. I mean, Kerry talks about the impact of going to the Louvre and to see a Géricault painting. I mean, that painting is massive. I remember taking my kids to see it. They looked distraught in front of this painting of the shipwreck. And I imagine Kerry, as a maker, would have felt, those paintings to be even more powerful. And I wanted to create that kind of sense in the Royal Academy and to treat his works also like, in the same way that when Charles I's collection was seen here and they had the amazing, I think, the Mantegna paintings in this room.
The Triumphs of Caesar paintings,
To have that kind of grandeur. So one of the ideas in terms of curating was to pick 4 wall colours. They're all stolen from the National Gallery, the National Portrait Gallery, the Walker in Liverpool. And I think these blues and maroons and greens and greys give a majesty to the already majestic paintings. But these paintings, they live alongside and compete with those great paintings of David, Géricault, Delacroix, all the French painters that you mentioned.
I mean, the reason that he's doing that is because he wants his work to be considered in the same way as theirs in the future, right? I mean, that's something that's really important to say. There's a tremendous ambition at the heart of this project.
I spent a lot of time thinking about the work and writing about it. And as an art historian, you might think about the way in which a contemporary artist refers to or quotes or, learns the composition from. But it was while I was actually at the Prado in Madrid that I realized, no, he wants to be there with Velázquez. He feels himself part of that conversation. And I think he deserves his place in the same, breath as those greats.
I would agree with you. And we're standing in front of one of his greatest here, which is called De Stijl. Again, we talked about humour earlier on, and there's a nod to De Stijl. And again, he is thinking about what abstraction does in relation to figuration and why it is that he is making a figurative statement in this picture, right?
Completely. So in this painting, there are flat blocks of red, orange and blue, as you would see in a De Stijl painting by Mondrian. And so he's very much sort of twisting Mondrian's De Stijl into thinking about what black style might mean. And he chooses to paint the barbershop. And you've got these 5 figures, 4 that you can see, one you can't quite see who are staring out at you. And he's also thinking about great paintings by Rembrandt, which have many male figures kind of looking out at you. Something I should also say about this painting that I noticed is that it's got a calendar in it. And the calendar is early 1991, and it almost dates the painting to the moment just after Rodney King was brutalized by the LAPD. And so I think if you look carefully at the painting, you have to think about what does this type of style and self-possession and resilience mean at that moment in 1991. So it's both a painting of everyday life and a history painting connected to the early 90s in America.
Indeed it is. There's also in this room the garden paintings, as they're known, and I think they point to a future as well as being fantastic paintings in their own right, because I can't look at these now without thinking of what Noah Davis does 20 years on. It shows his importance as a painter in grappling with subjects which move people and also point to a future for other artists, right?
Yeah, other artists, both painters, but also, the directors of music videos. I mean, there's one painting here called Watts 1963 that is set in Nickerson Gardens, which is the project, or like the housing estate where Kerry grew up when his family moved from Alabama to Los Angeles. And actually, Kendrick Lamar uses this as the backdrop for his video Not Like Us. So there's a scene in that video which is almost framed very similarly to how Kerry frames the housing project in this painting. But these paintings, they deal with the past, the hopes that the past had of the future, the realities of the present, and they deal with it all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about history paintings, it's important to say that he grapples very, very directly with contemporary social experiences. But it's important also to say that he has always said that he doesn't want to be too on the nose with this. He doesn't want these to be activist works, does he?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early 90s in Chicago and Los Angeles, some of the housing projects that had been built in the 50s and 60s were in quite a dire situation. There was the crack epidemic. There was a lot of crime. There had been lack of resources in these places. So Kerry could have made an activist painting that looked at a scene, of dilapidation, devastation, crime, but he doesn't. He makes paintings where people are living optimistic lives. Those people are thinking about why these places remain important places of community. And there are also, in these paintings, there are loads of references to abstract expressionism or to Disney cartoons. And so they're never just about a political statement. Not at all. They're very complex visual experiences and artworks.
Great stuff. Let's move on to the next room. In the catalogue, Mark, you talk about there's effectively 11 cycles of paintings in this exhibition. One of the most important cycles is the Middle Passage paintings. What were the circumstances in which he created these?
So Kerry, in the late 1980s, had been working on the set of Julie Dash's film Daughters of the Dust. He had been the set designer for that film.
Arthur Jafer was the cinematographer.
Arthur Jafer was the cinematographer. AJ had met Kerry in Los Angeles. He was married to Julie Dash at the time. AJ asked Kerry to work on the film, and Kerry's wife, Cheryl Lynn Bruce, features in the film. It's an amazing film, and Julie Dash will actually be coming to talk in the symposium that we're organising. But that group of people, as well as many others, had spent quite a lot of time in the Gula Islands off the coast of, I think, South Carolina. And they were very much thinking about the history of Middle Passage, the transatlantic slave trade, and what that meant in the present. And instead of making, what he might call costume drama images that firmly set the scene in the past, Kerry made a series of 5 works that think about the impact of the knowledge and memory of Middle Passage on contemporary consciousness. So, for instance, how might one be involved in, going to a theme park and going through a tunnel of love ride on one of those boats, and falling off the boat is somehow brings back the memory of falling off a slave ship, or the memory of people who jumped off and drowned. That sort of flashback, I think, is really interesting in relation to Octavia Butler, who wrote a book called Kindred at this time. So he's got connections to filmmakers and novelists at this point of time.
He's a very literary painter, actually. There's a lot of references to, we've already talked about, The Invisible Man. And as you say, Octavia Butler is enormously important. He's a great reader, it seems to me, as well as a great observer of other art.
Yeah, I think so. And, someone came through the show the other day, Hilton Oles, and talked about, what would Toni Morrison say of Kerry's work. And I think that, in the future, it would be great to see more scholarship around those connections between brilliant novelists and brilliant artists of this time.
Absolutely. Let's go into the next room. One of the ways in which I think he has shown his brilliance as much as any is in this amazing adaptability of his language to different genre. And again, the idea of being a painter across many genres was deeply unfashionable when he started becoming an artist, right? But here, in the room that we're standing in now, there are several portraits, and they are great portraits, and they are absolutely mindful of all the traditions and the trappings of that genre, that idiom. So tell us about this one that we're looking at, because this in its own way is almost an anomaly within the portrait series, but I think it's a tremendously powerful painting in all sorts of ways.
So this work is called Still Life with Wedding Portraits. The title doesn't name that we're looking at a painting of Harriet Tubman on her wedding day being manoeuvred by art handlers. I'll get to them in a sec. But Harriet Tubman is a legendary figure in Black American history. She led people on the Underground Railroad from enslavement in the South to safe houses in the North and then up to Canada. And I guess has been portrayed by many American artists before that tend to show her in this sort of activist moment of, her nickname was General Moses. Kerry chooses to give her more of an identity as someone who was loved by her husband and whose name, Tubman, became her surname. So he portrays a moment of her sort of emotional life that other artists before him didn't portray.
Right.
But then he makes it a painting within a painting, and one is left to ask, what does it mean that one of the art handlers has a black glove on that we know of from images of the Black Power movement? And why would the moment of now, when this painting was made, which was, I think, 2015, be a moment when you need to remember the resistance and politics of 1968 to 72, the Black Power moment? When Kerry made this, Barack Obama was the president. So I think one of the things that the painting makes you question is what resistance might look like in the present, as well as in the moment of Harriet Tubman.
There has been some speculation, or at least some people have suggested, that there's an element in which it could be a portrait of the Obamas, that he was channeling them a bit in the portrait of Harriet Tubman.
I think he was. Kerry, at this point, had been appointed to Barack Obama's Presidential Committee for the Arts. And I think that if you go online and look at Barack and Michelle Obama's wedding photographs, it's hard not to see some resemblance to this couple. So that's another twist in this painting.
But it's tremendously important then that there's the Black Power symbol within this picture, because it's saying that even when there is a black president, we know what happened next now, of course we do. But it's a warning, right? That black glove.
So. I think, many black artists that I've spoken to, like Arthur Jafer, while it was amazing to have Obama as president, it wasn't a moment for complacency or overdue celebration. In fact, the Black Lives Matter movement started under Barack Obama. And I think that black glove in this painting is a sort of moment in the painting to think about caution rather than great celebration in the middle of the 2010s.
Talking about black love, there are these paintings called vignettes, which I think are an astonishing body of work. I don't remember seeing any of these pictures before, even in reproduction, but they're full of pink, which one thinks of as a kind of sweet colour, and they are full of images of couples. But again, there's an element of caution about these, isn't there?
There is. I mean, they begin in a way with Kerry thinking about more French painting, like we were talking about before. He was interested in Rococo painting.
They feel very Fragonard. Yeah.
Exactly. And thinking, well, that tradition isn't dead for him. Could he find a way into it? From a distance, you think of these as simple love scenes. But when you approach them, you realize that they're quite troubling. For instance, in the painting Vignette La La La, you see a couple, they look from a distance like they're embracing, but in fact, the man is looking away from the woman. And in the distance, there's a tire on fire and a toppled statue. There's also a red, black, green flag. The scene that they're in is marked by political protest. So a love scene is disturbed. It's not taking place in some paradise, but in a landscape that's troubled by political unrest. And I think that's one of the great things about these works, is that they read very differently close up to how they look when you see them from a distance.
One of the things you do, Mark, in this show is that, yes, you have discrete bodies of work at times. You do have some elements where you can gather the chronology, but you take us into sort of episodes where we are out of time to a certain degree. The souvenir paintings are a bit earlier than the ones we were just talking about, but they are in a discrete presentation here in the central hall here at the Royal Academy. And what an impressive body of work they are. But one of the things that really strikes you is, again, that engagement with art history, with Renaissance or pre-Renaissance even painting, and these glittering, literally, wings which are on the figures. So tell us about those.
So these 4 paintings were first shown in Chicago at the end of the 90s at the Renaissance Society. And they are made as a kind of requiem for the 60s. 2 of the paintings feature silk-screened images of various political characters who were assassinated or murdered in the 60s. And 2 of the paintings feature the names of writers and musicians who died in the 60s. And they're set in middle-class houses in Chicago, and each one features an angel. And they're like Annunciation paintings. He was very much thinking about that tradition of the Annunciation. But here, the angel's alone. The Annunciation is always a painting with the angel and Mary. And here I think you, as a viewer, are almost kind of welcomed into the space and brought into it to think alongside this angel and to remember alongside them.
One of the absolute great things about this exhibition is the sight lines, and everywhere you go through a doorway you're just seeing fantastic things. You've really worked hard at that, it seems to me, but there are enticing views all over the place which really make you compelled to see the next room and move on through the show.
Thank you. I mean, I had never made an exhibition in a space like the Royal Academy. So, in fact, what I decided to do was to do very little. There's just one false wall here. The rest is just the Royal Academy architecture. I wanted it to look as grand as it is, and I chose that the walls should be painted. But that openness gives you these sight lines, and the very long sight line in the main axis leads towards a painting that I think is one of Kerry's total masterpieces, School of Beauty, School of Culture. A sort of partner to the barbershop painting De Style, but is set in a beauty salon. And there are, I think, 13 main figures in the painting. And it's extremely exciting to have it here in London because its main dialogue is with Holbein's ambassadors. So in that painting, there's this stretched out skull at the ground of the two ambassadors.
Anamorphic, we call it.
Anamorphic skull, exactly, at the ground in front of these two young ambassadors. And here there's an anamorphic sleeping beauty. So the question is whether white standards of beauty trouble the space of the black beauty salon. But there's other things in the painting. There's a painting of the poster for Chris Ofili's show at the Tate in 2010. Kerry and Chris are friends. Kerry wrote about Chris's work, and so there's that dialogue, but you'll also see a headshot of Kerry's wife, Cheryl Lynn Bruce, and also a painting of a signed Lauryn Hill album cover. So there's all sorts of things in this painting. It's a grand and amazing work.
It is a sort of, you pointed to lots of moments of critique through the show, but there are moments of celebration, and this painting feels to me among the most celebratory.
I think it is a celebration of, you know, ways of looking at people looking at each other, just enjoying getting ready, trying out poses, taking photographs of each other and so on. But I just say that stretched out sleeping beauty is the thing that troubles it from being an outright celebration, because at least you have to figure what is that strange thing in the foreground. And then you have to, once you figure out that it's sleeping beauty, you have to ask the question, like, how do, for instance, white standards of beauty still trouble people who don't come from that racial group?
Now, he isn't just a painter, is he? You haven't gone much into his sculptural work in this show, but you have, I guess, what might be, his most important sculpture, which is called Wake. It was shown at the Venice Biennale in 2003, which was a big moment for him internationally. But it's also significant just in terms of its relationship to the rest of the work, isn't it?
Yes, so Wake was shown in 2003 with the painting Gulfstream, and we've reunited the two of them together, I think for the first time since that Venice Biennial. But it's a sculpture that changes each time it's shown. It's a sculpture which is a black ship floating on a kind of black plinth that is a sort of black sea. And it trails behind a wake of medallions. And these medallions, each of them features a black and white or sometimes colour photograph of a black American. Some of them are famous people. If you look closely, you can see pictures of Amiri Baraka and Aretha Franklin. But many of them are just people that maybe Kerry took from a school yearbook or a newspaper. And I think he was adding more and more medallions with each display of this work in accordance with the idea of the power figure in Congo cultures, where a nail driven into a wooden statue gives that statue more power. The accumulation of those nails is what gives the statue power. So this addition of medallions is according to that principle. But he also wants to think here about the growing power of African American culture and the idea that the Middle Passage isn't just a moment of extreme tragedy, which of course it is, but it's also a moment that leads to unbelievable cultural expression.
I guess in a way the last room of the show also refers to some of that and the legacy of some of that, doesn't it? It's a small space, but it makes a really super powerful impact, I think.
Yeah, the last room focuses on three works which bring together red, black and green. And they are looking back at Marcus Garvey and the red, black and green flag. But they're also, I think, making interesting interventions into art history. One of the painters Kerry loved as a kid was Goya. And one of his most famous paintings is the reclining Maya. And that, of course, informs Manet when Manet made Olympia, and was informed previously by Titian's naked
Venus
nudes.
of Urbino,
exactly. So what Kerry adds to this tradition with a painting of a man lying on a bed. He's got his Argyle socks on and his penis is covered by a red, black and green flag. It's a brilliant painting and it's really, it's a witty painting as well. What I wanted to do is for different rooms to capture different moods in his work as well. And so I think there's a different sort of mood to this last room than to the other rooms in the exhibition.
One of the things I'm really conscious of as we come to this end of this show is it is a landmark monographic show. And I know you have strong feelings about these kind of exhibitions and why they're important, Mark.
You know, it's a big effort financially and logistically to bring together loans from many, many different museums. There's the expense, but this provides the audience with an amazing opportunity to see the most important works of an incredible artist. And I worry that exhibition makers in this country are sort of shying away from these grand exhibitions because of the environmental and economic impact of bringing together loans like this. But I just think it's super important to continue to make large-scale exhibitions and to be ambitious with exhibitions like this, because I think they celebrate amazing artists and they give the space for new people to discover art and to go on to be great artists themselves.
Okay, well, Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, as I say, as a coda to the Royal Academy exhibition, there is a parallel show at the Tabernacle, which is in West London, in Notting Hill. And I'm here with Nikita, who has co-curated that with Mark. Nikita, can you just set the scene in terms of the Rythm Mastr works by Kerry James Marshall? When did he begin this series? Was he making these as a child, or was it much later than that?
The Rythm Mastr series is a long-running side project of Kerry's, and it was first shown in 1999 as part of the Carnegie International in Pittsburgh, which was organised by Madeleine Gridston. And when Kerry was first invited to be part of the show, I think many people expected him to show the large-scale works that he had become associated with. Now, you mentioned the Garden Project series earlier, the Middle Passage paintings, but he completely subverted that expectation. And I think even in that first incident shows his playfulness, his witticism and his humour, because the Rythm Mastr works are works in print mostly. They've evolved throughout the years, but they've always been printed matter.
Proper graphic novels.
Exactly. Comics.
Yeah.
Paper comics.
Comics on newsprint. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when he was invited in 1999, there was a room in the Carnegie Museum called the Treasure Room with glass display cases that traditionally held treasured pieces from different eras. And what Marshall decided to do for this installation was to actually cover those glasses with newsprints as if they were storefronts. For example, like boarded up storefronts that were covered with newspapers. And if you came close enough to look, if you thought it was worth looking at these covered up vitrines, you would have seen the Rythm Mastr world unfold. And cracks within the newspapers revealed origami objects like dustpans, airplanes that were made from the same material.
Can you give us an idea of the story that's behind the Rythm Mastr series? Because it's a consistent story, right? There is a character called Rythm Mastr and he plays a particular role in this storyline, this narrative.
Yes, exactly. It is worth saying that the Rythm Mastr is a specific character, but there are multiple storylines and plot lines within the Rythm Mastr universe. It's a sprawling world with different characters, but at its heart is the Rythm Mastr. And we meet him when a couple within the Black metropolis, which is where the story is set, are separated during a shootout. So the Rythm Mastr is set within a backdrop of gang violence. And so this couple are separated.
Loosely based on Chicago, right?
Exactly, the south side of Chicago. Mm-hmm. The couple is separated during a shootout, and Pharrell, Stash's partner, runs into the ancient Egyptian museum where he encounters the Rythm Mastr. The Rythm Mastr has a drum which awakens the African artifacts held in the museum. And with this, we see Kerry thinking through the idea that many of these artifacts were taken from West African or African civilizations and brought over and held in Western museums. For example, the African artifacts we see here very much reflect the kinds of works held in places like the Art Institute of Chicago and the Metropolitan Museum in New York.
So he's dealing with decolonization. He's addressing decolonization.
Exactly. And almost ahead of his time, he's also dealing with ideas of restitution, because when the Rythm Mastr beats his drum, he wakes these artifacts up, which again deals with the reality that these artifacts weren't meant to be seen as art. In many ways, they held power. They were healing objects. They were spirit-filled. And so there's something about them losing this spirit, this soul, by being held statically within glass display cases, for example.
So it's interesting, isn't it, then, that he effectively makes these superheroes who go out into communities. So you say it's based in this metropolis, but what happens is that these wakened spirits then go into these communities and act with contemporary people.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's great that you mentioned this, actually, because when Kerry was growing up reading comics, it wasn't until he was 10 years old that Marvel published a comic with the first Black superhero, the Black Panther, but he was a character within the Avengers. He wasn't a main character in his own comic. And actually, one critique that Kerry's had was that the Black characters or Black superheroes he saw often fought petty crime. And he wanted Black superheroes with more depth that spoke to the rich history and expansive history of African Americans, of Africans. Yeah. And so he's also reading works like Flash of the Spirit by Robert Farris Thompson, for example.
He wanted them, instead of dealing with petty crime, to address systemic issues, right?
I think yes, or at least be in conversation with the socio-political realities of African Americans, or at least the characters in the Black metropolis, because there are strips where we see them talking about housing demolitions and the transformation of the area. And so that is a strong element, but we are also seeing characters who are engaged in art criticism. So actually the comic is a vehicle for Kerry to be much more explicit about his view on contemporary art, his view around Black artists, for example, Black curators.
We've looked at some of the newsprint that you mentioned, but also in this display, and I think we'll end by looking at it, is a large-scale vinyl. I think this really explains to us, and people will see very clearly, how those African artefacts that you were talking about are animated as the superheroes in the community. So tell us what we're looking at here.
We're looking at a vinyl reproduction of a work that was originally in the Fondazione Prada in 2023, an exhibition around folding screens. And this gives us a much wider view, wider scale of the Rythm Mastr world and the African artifacts turned superheroes. So right in the center of the piece, we see Nkisi Nkondi, which is a spirit-filled object. If you look closely, we see there are nails punctured into it, which is part of enhancing its powers. And interestingly enough, it's in one of the first works you see at the Royal Academy show.
Yeah, the work called The Academy, which opens the show.
Exactly. On the side, we see Ibeyi, which are Orisha twin gods, which emanates from the Yoruba people. We also see a depiction of Oba, who is traditionally the ruler of Benin. And so this piece, it almost drops you right into the action.
Okay, well, Nikita, thank you very much for showing us around this exhibition.
Thank you.
Kerry James Marshall, The Histories, is at the Royal Academy of Arts in London from the 20th of September until the 18th of January 2026. It then tours to the Kunsthaus Zurich from the 27th of February until the 16th of August next year, and it's then at the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris from the 18th of September 2026 to the 24th of January 2027. And Rythm Mastr, The Chronicles, is at the Tabernacle in London until the 14th of December. Coming up, new plans for the National Gallery and Picasso's Three Dancers at Tate Modern. That's after this week's news bulletin. A Moscow court has sentenced 5 members of Pussy Riot, the activist punk art and music collective, to prison sentences ranging from 8 to 13 years on charges of spreading what Russian authorities call fakes about the Russian military via their videos and performances. Maria or Masha Alekina, Olga Borisova, Diana Berkut, Alina Petrova and Tasso Pletner were sentenced in absentia. According to TASS, the Russian news agency, Alekina and Pletner were sentenced to 13 and 11 years respectively respectively in a penal colony, while the 3 other defendants got 8 years each. Elekina, Borisova, Berkut and Pletno were found guilty of spreading knowingly false information containing data about the deployment of the Russian armed forces in a video posted on YouTube in December 2022 called Mama Don't Watch TV Anti-War Song. The song opens with the words "The Howls of Mariupol," referring to the city in the Donetsk region that Russia destroyed and then illegally annexed following the launch of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Elekina was also charged, along with Pletna and Petrova, for an April 2024 performance in Munich in Germany that addressed the destruction of Mariupol. The performance included one of them urinating on a portrait of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Sotheby's has secured 2 valuable private collections for the auction house's autumn New York sales, offering significant wins as Sotheby's losses mount amid a weakened market. The 37 works that belong to the late Chicago-based collectors Jay and Cindy Pritzker are expected by specialists to collectively bring in around $120 million, and 55 works from the collection of the cosmetics billionaire Leonard Lauder, who died in June, are collectively estimated to sell for around $400 million. Just one work in the Lauder auction accounts for more than a third of the consignment's total. Gustav Klimt's portrait of Elizabeth Lederer from 1914 to 16 has an estimate in excess of $150 million. 2 Klimt landscapes are expected to sell for between $80 million and $100 million, and $70 million and $90 million. The collection also includes works by Henri Matisse, Edvard Munch and Agnes Martin. Works from the Pritzker's collection are led by Vincent van Gogh's Roman Parisien Les Livres Jaunes from 1887, a still life of a stack of books with a $40 million estimate. A frantic operation to evacuate thousands of artefacts from Gaza's main archaeological storage facility took place last week, ahead of an Israeli strike that destroyed the building. The Geneva Museum of Art and History played a key role in the evacuation process. Israeli forces issued eviction notices to residents in Gaza City, warning them to leave ahead of strikes targeting high-rise buildings, including the 10-storey Al-Kawthar residential tower, which housed the storage facility of the French Biblical and Archaeological School of Jerusalem. The Israeli military alleged that there was Hamas infrastructure in or around the building. The facility contained finds from key archaeological sites in Gaza, including the ruins of the 4th century St. Hilarion Monastery, which are on UNESCO's World Heritage List. On Monday, Israel's Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories, or COGAT, claimed the artefacts belonged to Gaza's Christian community and described the operation as part of the effort to allow the movement of residents and international organisations to the southern Gaza Strip for their protection. But Emek Shaver, an Israeli NGO that works to prevent the politicisation of archaeology in the Israeli-Palestinian context, condemned this announcement as a disgrace and stated that since the war began, Israel has damaged or destroyed hundreds of protected cultural sites and artefacts. It added that portraying the evacuation as if Israel were investing resources to prevent such harm is, quote, absurd and constitutes a mockery of international law. The NGO also criticised the claim that the artefacts belong only to Gaza's Christian community, emphasising that the heritage represents millennia of culture and belongs to all Gazans and Palestinians. Not all objects were saved from the strike. Around 30% of the items, believed to be ceramics and lapidary objects, remained on site when the building was destroyed. You can read these stories and much more on the Art Newspaper's website and app. We'll be back after this.
This is your business. This is your business supercharged with the help of zero accounting software. This is managing cash flow. This is managing your cash flow with the help of zero accounting software. These are your customers paying you. These are your customers having more ways to pay you with the help of zero accounting software. This is your business supercharged with the help of Zero, helping you sort your cash flow by giving your customers more ways to pay, so now you can focus on making your business boom! Supercharge your business today with the help of Zero.
Search Zero with an X! Long day at work.
Are you okay?
And you just need a good laugh? We've got you. Because with award-winning Sky shows like Mr. Big Stuff,
We're coming for you.
Robin Romesh versus
I feel like it's a punishment. Either way, I'm in.
Brassic,
I've heard a lot about you.
and brand new US comedies Ted, Hacks, and The Paper, you can deal with anything the day throws at you.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Sky, believe in better.
Retailers are entering a new era, one powered by AI and filled with opportunity. But they shouldn't have to do it alone. Meet Commerce, uniting big commerce, Feedonomics and MakeSwift into one ecosystem. All the tools you need to adapt faster, scale smarter and grow with confidence. Commerce's future-proof solutions turn data into discovery, create storefronts seamlessly, and build frictionless shopping experiences. Learn more at commerce.com.
Welcome back. Now, as regular listeners will know, only a few months ago, the National Gallery in London opened its renovated Sainsbury wing and the rehang of its collection. But it's already embarked on a further transformation. Last week, the National announced details of a new initiative, Project Domani, that will create an extension to the gallery thanks to the demolition of a 1960s building it owns next to the Sainsbury wing. It will cost around £400 million and it's hoped will open in the early 2030s. The gallery has already raised £375 million of the cost, thanks in part to two donations of £150 million each. The extension will have 2 floors dedicated to the gallery's permanent collection, allowing for the display of up to 250 more pictures, as well as a temporary exhibition space. An international architectural competition for the extension has been launched, and an architect should be appointed by March 2026. Our digital editor, Alexander Morrison, went to the gallery to talk to its director, Gabriele Finaldi.
Gabriele, the first question I wanted to ask about Project Domani is why now? You've just successfully launched a reimagination of the Sainsbury Wing entrance, rehung the collection, celebrated the bicentenary with a range of events, including a massive festival in Trafalgar Square. What made you choose this moment to make this news public?
The bicentenary was always the door to the gallery's 3rd century, and I think there's nothing like a bicentenary to make you think about what you want to be in the future. The reason why it happened now is because the leases on the building, it's called St Vincent House, are coming to a close. We needed to take a decision quite soon. But it's also a sort of maturing of other thoughts about how the gallery might move forward in terms of how we use the estate, about how we develop the collection, and a variety of different circumstances came together, most notably these extraordinarily generous pledges of support, which will enable this to happen going ahead.
And they are extraordinary. I mean, you've raised £375 million so far, 300 million of which is 2 donations of 150 million each, the largest known cash donations to any cultural institution ever, anywhere. How was this achieved?
They are completely extraordinary, completely extraordinary. I think that's it's important to recognise, because I think they signal something quite new. I think they signal something new potentially for the UK as well, not just the National Gallery itself, but the kind of ambition that it's legitimate to have for cultural institutions in the UK. They are very generous donations. One comes from America, Sir Michael Moritz and Harriet Hayman, his wife. He was born in Wales and very committed to the UK, but made his fortune in California, but is very keen to invest back in the UK, and we're delighted he wants to invest in the cultural infrastructure and in the National Gallery in particular, and in the growth and development of our gallery. The other donation comes from the Julia Rousing Trust. Julia Rousing was very well known to us. She sadly passed away last year, but her husband, Sir Hans Rousing, was very keen to honour his wife by this very important donation to the gallery. They both love the gallery very much.
And do you think there's something about the galleries that draws such exceptional support? That, passion for the UK and its cultural sector is one thing, but why the gallery?
Well, I think one thing that we discovered during the bicentenary year is the sheer amount of affection and the sheer amount of, let's call it love, actually, for the National Gallery, both from the public in general and for people who love museums and love culture. And I think in some ways the National Gallery can be a little bit of a flagship. It can also be going slightly ahead of the sector and signify some of the things that can be happening in the future in the sector. I believe it to be an amazing place. I've always believed that. I've been coming since I was a child. And I think the last few years have been particularly successful for us in terms of our acquisitions, our exhibitions, and the building work that we've done in connection with the bicentenary. So it's a good moment, in a sense, to be associated with the gallery.
Absolutely. And you obviously have just come off the Sainsbury Ring reveal. That was not a simple process. There was quite a lot of criticism in the years running up and concern about the plans. What will you take from that process going into this one?
So, in a way, the Trafalgar Square site of the National Gallery has always been the cause of controversy in one form or another. And building on Trafalgar Square is also traditionally a place of controversy too. I suppose what we tried to do with the Sainsbury Ring and the changes that we made there were mostly about changing the main entrance of the gallery from the portico on the square to the Sainsbury Ring. That was not the original intention of the architects who built the Sainsbury Ring, the very distinguished husband and wife couple, Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. So we were intervening quite significantly on the way the building was going to be used. My feeling is that we've been very sensitive to the original architect's idea of what that building should be and how it should function, but it's updated to the kinds of needs that we need to confront now with a very large visiting public and with other sorts of expectations that visitors have when they come to a big museum in the centre of a big city like London.
And so do you anticipate fewer issues? Because Venturi was obviously one of the figures who you had to have conversations with when it came to the Sainsbury Ring. Is Vincent House free of some of that prior...
I imagine there'll be plenty of controversy around what we want to do in St Vincent House as well. But that building is not a distinguished building.
Interesting. Do you think that's widely held view? What's the history of that building?
I've not found anyone yet who has deep devotion and love to St Vincent House. It's an example of 1960s sort of efficient architecture, I would say. It was built as an office block. And it functions today partly as an office and partly as a hotel.
And you've talked previously about the need, because there's this idea of creating a cultural quarter that will link Leicester Square and Trafalgar Square in a more...
I think that's one of the most exciting bits of the project, that we can be at the centre of what becomes a vibrant cultural centre in Westminster. We refer to it as the Arts Quarter. It's a scheme that's sort of supported by Westminster. If you think of... you've got Leicester Square at one end of it, you've got Trafalgar Square at the other, you've got this sort of no man's land in the middle, which is not particularly nice and not particularly welcoming. I think there is the opportunity to create a sort of unified area and a bit of central London that we can really be very, very proud of.
Another part of the announcement this week was the fact that the National Gallery would be letting go of the cut-off point of collecting paintings up to around 1900 and slightly later. How is that going to work in practice? I understand you've been in negotiations and in conversations with Tate, but you spoke a while ago about the idea of Tate looking at more kind of avant-garde and abstract works, while the National Gallery might be focused more on the kind of earlier 20th century or the classics, if you like. Is that still the case, or is that
it's not particularly that sort of carve-up. The gallery tells the story of painting. Tate, of course, has a much broader remit. And we've been feeling for some time here at the gallery that 1900 is quite a strange cut-off point. It's also getting further and further back in time. And of course, lots and lots of interesting things have happened in the history of painting over the course of the 20th century, some of which are very well illustrated in the Tate's collection. So we want to work together with Tate. We also want to develop the story of painting as a kind of broader story, from its medieval origins right through, in a sense, to our own times. So that will involve creating new spaces for paintings that will come into the collection, important loans, acquisitions in the future. It's not a vast number of paintings, but it is very much about telling the story of painting. We're complementary institutions, we're sister institutions, we work together, and we tell our stories in different ways. Generally speaking, we tell them in a sort of chronological way. They tend to tell them in a thematic way. But they're very complementary.
Yes, and so there's no suggestion the National Gallery could be collecting as much super ultra contemporary work up until the present day as Tate might be.
Well, we work with contemporary artists, as you know. We're doing that all the time and have been doing that for many years. And we've been doing exhibitions with contemporary artists. We have an artist studio, actually, in the gallery. I don't know if you knew that, but we're one of the very few sort of historic art museums that actually have a practicing artist studio in it. And we've had it really since the 1970s. But it's more about telling a sort of fuller story of the history of painting. And also remember that what's absolutely contemporary is sometimes quite difficult to be discerning about, and it's all happening around you. We need to take a bit of distance and have a little time pass before we acquire things for the collection. We need to have a sense that what's being produced has significance for the future, has a certain kind of weight to it. So there'll always be a little bit of distance on what we do, but we'll still be working with contemporary artists for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I arrived today and walked up and there was the Richard Long mud painting,
2025, yes,
right.
Exactly.
So there is that already kind of embedded in the gallery.
Yes, and think of Bridget Riley's great murals that she did back in 2018, or think back to Paula Rego. She was here in the late 80s, early 90s, as the associate artist at the National Gallery, producing a work which was for the gallery spaces.
There was an agreement drawn up in 1996 between the Tate, it's on the Tate website, that kind of lays down that separation and how that Tate and the National Gallery will handle their collections. Will that be updated? I know there was another, I think it was 2009, it was updated again, but will it have a revision?
There's currently a working group between the two trustee bodies and the two technical teams at the gallery on a new agreement between us. It's a collaborative agreement. I don't want to preempt its work, but it will recognise that the National Gallery's collection is evolving, and Tate want to help us with that. So it'll be a different situation from before, but I don't want to preempt the agreement any more than that.
Okay, we'll wait and see. I mean, there have been already some critics, as you would imagine, the National Gallery is going to draw this kind of attention. Our columnist, Bendel Grosner, in our October issue, which has not yet been published, expresses fears that without a clear dividing line between the collections of the National Gallery and Tate, that the two institutions will be competing for the same audiences, the same funding, the same pictures. How do you respond to that?
I'm not sure that's right, in the sense that, we've got large audiences in London, both UK-based and coming in from abroad. We want to all grow those audiences across the whole of the museum offering in London. I think there's plenty of opportunity to do that. Remember, there's quite an overlap anyway between our collections. Tate Britain, which houses the National Collection of British Painting, of course, has some of the same artists that we have also in representing British painting within a European context here. So that argument that seeing the same artists in two different institutions is confusing for the public, I don't think holds water. But it's also about the way we tell our stories with our collections. And I said before that, broadly we tell a chronological story. So we feel we have a kind of responsibility for, recounting that sort of great arc of history. And painting, of course, is one of the great genres of artistic production. And Tate, of course, has this very, very large remit to show all kinds of things, from, photography to all kinds of artistic production right into our own time.
Yes, I mean, they do obviously have some incredible paintings as well. Is there a sense that there may be some exchange between... I mean, I was struck by the Picasso, the kind of mother and child. It really made me think about what would happen if you brought a load more Picassos and what that would do to the gallery's DNA.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a very interesting example, the Picasso. So when you see it in the National Gallery, in a sense, you see it as part of a longer history, and inevitably your mind is brought back to the Raphaels you've seen a few rooms down. And
it's quite an early Picasso, yeah.
Yes, it's mother and child, it's not a virgin and child, but, Picasso is clearly picking up on some aspect of the history of art. I suppose that same picture in the Tate or in a museum of modern art would be viewed differently, as something that was marking a new beginning, rather than connecting with something which was more in the tradition. So the way pictures appear in different contexts, of course, gives them a different interpretation and a different approach, I guess.
And obviously the gallery has for a long time been predominantly focused on Western European painting. That has been a focus for a while. Is there a sense that you will now broaden the horizons geographically? I know you will always stick to one medium, but what's the thought there?
Traditionally, the gallery has shown European painting.
Yes.
But of course, you could say, well, European is a very big category, and do you mean Europe in terms of geography, or do you mean Europe in terms of culture, and so on? These are categories that can be explained in lots of different ways. I suppose a useful way to thinking about it is, we show art in the Western tradition. We show some American painting, and we have done exhibitions of works from Australia and from Mexico and from other areas of the globe that conform to a particular interpretation of the Western tradition. And I think that's right for the National Gallery.
I mean, the National Gallery is, by its nature and by its name, an institution that serves the entire country. The benefits of Project Domani are very clear to London and to the National Gallery site in London. How do you hope that the project will serve the nation at large?
That's a very good point. So I think one of the things, again, with the bicentenary always in the background, because I think that's very important for our thinking. We've tried lots of different things in terms of fulfilling a national mission for the National Gallery. We took pictures out on the road. We did exhibitions in different places. We showed some of our great masterpieces across the 4 nations. Before that, we've taken pictures into rather unexpected places like prisons and libraries and shopping centres and so on. So I think there's quite a lot of imaginative work going on in museums, not just at the National Gallery, but in museums about how we share our works. And because we're a national institution, we're keen to share them, particularly across the whole of the UK. And in a sense, the gallery in London becomes the base for a lot of this activity. Now, some of it is digital, some of it is lending pictures, some of it is sharing resources, some of it is supporting initiatives up and down the country in lots of different ways. So I feel that, while Project Domani is London-based, it's more about the National Gallery being a bigger institution that serves the UK public better in lots of different ways.
And I suppose by the fact that you're expanding the story you're telling, that story will expand as it travels as well.
Yes, and I'm sure that as the collection develops into the 20th century, there'll be lots of opportunities to share that story across the UK as well, together with Tate, actually.
Well, thank you very much, Gabriele.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Alex.
You can read more on this story on the website and the app. And now it's time for the work of the week. Tate Modern has this week opened Theatre Picasso, a new exhibition at whose heart is one of the greatest of all Picasso's works, The Three Dancers from 1925. Picasso told the surrealist artist, writer and collector Roland Penrose that he even preferred The Three Dancers to his anti-fascist opus Guernica because, quote, it's a real painting, a painting in itself without any outside considerations. Now, exactly 100 years old, its forms and meanings have been the subject of much conjecture. The exhibition at Tate Modern unites the Three Dancers with the entire Tate Picasso collection, as well as major loans, in a radical presentation staged by the artist Wu Sang and the author and curator Enrique Fuenteblanca. I went to Tate Modern to speak to Fuenteblanca and first to the co-curator of the exhibition, Tate's Natalia Sidlina. Natalia, we like to begin the work of the week by asking where Pablo Picasso was at the time that he made this work. And I mean where he was both in terms of his working life and literally geographically.
What we know about this work, that it wasn't created in one day or in one go. It's a complex, multi-layered composition. It was created in 1925, and it was the time where Picasso enjoyed fame. He just been celebrated for years as a designer for the Ballet Russe. He had a young family, glamorous wife, a young son.
This is Olga Koklova, who is a dancer.
Olga Koklova was a dancer with the Ballet Russe, with the Diaghilev Enterprise, the Ballet Russe. And this close encounter with the dancers and the physicality of the forms activated by the movement of the human body, Picasso got to experience firsthand, not only as a designer for the Ballet Russe, but also as a husband who could observe Olga during her rehearsals and during her exercises and the very regimented lifestyle she had to maintain as a ballet dancer.
Right. And the first manifestations of his response to that was the neoclassical works, right? So the association with the Ballet Russe really triggered a shift in the way that he was working, and it was part of a sort of symptom within the sort of post-First World War movement in Paris and elsewhere in Europe towards what was called a return to order, right? So to what extent is this painting a kind of break with that return to order?
You are absolutely right. If we look at the compositions created after the end of the First World War and in the early 1920s, like A Woman in the White Chemise, which we see in our Theatre Picasso exhibition, they are serene presentations of women and dancers. They're beautiful, almost stylized still lifes. with a beautiful palette, very intricate compositions, and all this ends in 1925 with the three dancers. So it's complete break with the neoclassical and the shift towards what we now know as biomorphs.
And is that partly also in relation to other cultural developments, which of course are deeply related to the social and political conditions of the time, like surrealism? To what extent is Picasso responding to surrealism in this painting, or to the ideas that were informing surrealism at least?
So what we know about this painting is that it was started in Paris sometime in the winter of 1925. It was created after he already broke away from the very bourgeois by then, very high-class environment of the Ballet Russe and engaged with much more experimental, less highbrow performances such as the Enterprise of Count de Beaumont and the Mercure Ballet, which he not only designed stage sets and costumes for, but also staged the tableaus on stage for this performance, indicate him wanting to break away from that environment. He lives in a very high-class bourgeois neighborhood in Paris, in the 8th arrondissement. He has an apartment, huge suite of rooms in a neoclassical building. He can afford it now. He's represented by one of the most successful dealers in Paris. He can afford experimentation and he can afford breaking away from the society who pays for his works.
Right.
And The Three Dancers is one of those manifestations. So we know the composition he started in the beginning of 1925 was executed in a very traditional grisaille palette, similar to the work he done on the Three Graces for the Comte de Beaumont.
Right. Do you know that from conservation, basically? You've
we
looked
know
beneath
that
the surface.
From conservation, absolutely. And not only from that, if you spend a little bit of time with the Three Dancers, you'll be amazed how many secrets it unveils. You'll see the layered structure of it. You see almost textured way the top left corner is constructed with a very thick impasto covering up other layers of painterly experimentation. You will see the craquelure.
He liked it, right? He liked the craquelure.
He liked the craquelure. He was really pleased with it. He also liked the craquelure exposed the composition underneath it. So it started with grisaille, then it moved to much more traditional Three Dancers, very similar to compositions he executed in 1923, 1924, and then all of a sudden something happened and it completely changed.
What was that something? Do you know? There is a lot of content related to this painting that says that the death of Raymond Pichot, his friend, was a turning point. But was that the formal turning point? Could it have informed the fact that he chose to paint it in this much more fractured manner?
So the death of Raymond Pichot, that the painting should be called the death of Raymond Pichot. I was so struck by the loss due to departure of my dear friend Raymond Pichot, was a single comment from Picasso, which was made when the work was sold from his collection to Tate Gallery in 1965. There's no mention of Raymond Pichot before. There's no mention of this personal tragedy before. And we know that Picasso really liked to channel our vision and interpretation of the work in the particular direction of his choosing. What we also know were that, say, in 1939, when the great retrospective of Picasso works was in preparation at MoMA in New York, Alfred Barr sent Picasso a huge questionnaire, list of questions. One of them was about the Three Dancers and where it was the turning point and whether the Three Dancers meant that he was changing his practice completely. The answer to this question was ... dot.
Right, simply that. So at that stage, the Ramon Pichot narrative was just nothing to do with the painting.
Absolutely nothing to do with the painting.
Interesting.
So we can take it as a point of departure and look at it from the purely biographical and go back to the 1905 and go back to this love triangle.
Yes.
And go back to the suicide of his another dear friend, Carlos Casagemas, and the involvement of the femme fatale he would later marry Pichot, and interpret those figures in a purely biographical. And this is what Picasso wanted us to do. But whether that was the case, it's a big question.
How interesting. Of course, one of the most extraordinary things about this painting is the formal characteristics of the three dancers themselves. They're each treated very differently in certain ways. Of course, they're interlinked and sometimes their limbs cross each other's and you're not sure which belongs to which dancer. But that is such an extraordinary dynamic element of the composition, isn't it? The way that he depicts the three dancers.
Absolutely. And we can talk and guess what kind of dance the three dancers are dancing, which take us to the very beginning, to the title of the work. So we, in the collection, follow the cataloguing which was done for the 1939 MoMA show and call it The Three Dancers. It was first published in French as Three Young Women Dancing by the Window, and it was first published, of course, before even the paint dried on the canvas in André Breton's publication Révolution Surréaliste in summer 1925. Picasso catalogued it as La Danse, or simply The Dance.
That's right. And John Richardson uses that title in his biography.
John Richardson using in his multi-volume biography. So already the title shows us the dynamics around this work and how much the movement and the body's ability to transform and express through movement meant for Picasso and this painting.
And Richardson very clearly locates the movement within the Charleston, doesn't he? And even that is open to speculation, isn't it? I mean, he sort of sees it as a kind of almost possessed Charleston, a deathly Charleston, because of the Pichot story.
Exactly. Pichot's story channels our imagination in a particular way, gives us very misogynistic view of the only identifiable female character in it as a femme fatale whose charms lead to suicides and betrayal. But if we look at the composition itself without thinking of a particular dance, then there are so many references we can bring in. So the figure on the left, which is known in art history as Minide because of her expressive, almost possessed way of movement, it's actually a direct translation of the pose of Lois Fuller on her famous poster. So if you flip the poster and look at the plate, it's the very same contorted body, the leg, the arm, the head, absolute mirror image of it. If you look at the central figure, you can think of corrida and the dance of banderillas.
Right.
So
when you say corrida, you mean a bullfight?
Bullfight.
Yeah.
So the raised hands, the motion, the way the legs are positioned. And when you look at the figure on the right-hand side, you can think of a popular dance, of a round dance. We also could bring other popular forms of dance. We can think of flamenco. We could think of ritual dancing connected to the dance of death. We can think of the ballet. We can think of can-can. So there are a lot of references. I don't think we'll get to the bottom of what Picasso wanted to represent, but what we know is that there's both high and low. There's influence of the years he spent looking at Olga and other ballet dancers of the Ballet Russe, and also his engagement and genuine interest in the very popular forms of dance, such as flamenco.
That's fascinating. Now, you mentioned that it went to the Museum of Modern Art earlier on. One of the things about this, again, there are myths connected to the provenance even of this painting, because that's sort of a hidden part of its history, isn't it? It was always sort of seen like it was this great Picasso that he loved more than Guernica, that he kept close to him, and the great Roland Penrose managed to clasp it from his grasp and it ended up in the British National Collections. But that's not quite the case, is it?
Absolutely. The history is written by the victors, and Penrose won. He famously said that Picasso didn't want to sell, and I really wanted to buy it. I just wanted to buy it a little bit more than Picasso didn't want to sell it. So for him, it was ultimate victory to secure this work for a national collection in Britain. And when it came to the Tate Gallery collection in 1965, if you look at the trustees' reports for the year 1965, you'll see that the work was hailed as transformative for national collection. This great masterpiece, this great canvas, Picasso always kept close to himself in his personal stash, so kind of this vision of the work moving straight from the vaults of Picasso's personal collection and into the galleries of Tate was mesmerizing for the trustees and amplified the importance of this acquisition. With this exhibition, Theatre Picasso, opening at Tate Modern, we had an opportunity to delve deeper and look at the hidden histories, thanks for the relationship we formed with Musée Picasso Paris and their very kind permission for us to access their archives. So what I found there was a report from Museum of Modern Art, which very kind of in a registrarial way stated that the work arrived to New York in 1939 for the Picasso exhibition. In 1941, its status changed into that of a war loan in order to preserve it from being shipped back to France and be subject to Nazi
to keep it safe, basically.
looting. And that the work was returned in 1958. So in 19 years, the work was kept at MoMA. And it also lists every single move of the work. We know which floor it was exhibited and when. We know which touring exhibition it was sent to. We know when it was sent for its very first color photography in 1948. We know that it was restored. Complete record which completely escaped art historical analysis just because of the seductive quality of this idea of the work moving from the vault of Picasso's personal stash to Tate.
How wonderful. It's a good moment to bring in Enrique now. So I wonder if we'll just thank you, Natalia. We're going to talk to Enrique now.
Thank you, Ben.
Enrique, we've heard about the art history of this painting quite in depth now. But one of the things that Tate is doing with this show, and you are doing with this show, is to bring this painting into a new dimension for contemporary audiences. One thing I've noticed, for instance, is that whilst we've been sitting here, the light is changing, as if the light is performing, as if we are on a theatre stage. Tell us about that. That's an example of the kinds of tricks, if you like, that you're playing with the audience to involve them and make them an active participant with this picture, right?
Actually, our idea was trying to introduce a kind of choreographic feeling of the movement of the audience and the way that we position ourselves in the exhibition. So you mentioned the word trick. That is something that we actually wanted to implement, because one of the things that we were kind of surprised while researching through Picasso's work was how he used the illusion and the idea of trick and the idea of transformation all the time. For example, Natalia was talking about the figures and about the way of like how we could interpret all these dance that are happening at the same time in the Three Dancer. Actually, there is something really interesting in the way that the figures are always in metamorphosis, are in a transformation that makes them ungraspable. We cannot grasp what they are shaping, what they are dancing, when they start, when they finish. All this kind of feeling of metamorphosis, continuous metamorphosis in Picasso was really important to us to understand like how there is something ungraspable, something that changed, something that actually has to do with performativity and with the way that we look to the art.
So in a way what you're saying is that the constant metamorphosis of the dancers is a kind of metaphor for how you've gone about organising the show, in a way that Picasso remains ungraspable for all the biographical detail we have on him, for all the study that has been done of his works over the years. There's something that remains somewhat elusive, and you're trying to allude to that in some way, and talk about this performativity, and that is part of it, right?
Exactly. Actually, we were also really impressed. One of the small details that we found when we were doing archival research was the change he did to transform the scenery design, stage design for Pulcinella, and how he transformed it later dancer to a cuadro flamenco, a really important also a piece for the Russian ballets. We think that in all the popular performative construction, there is always this kind of uses of the tools, of illusion, of tricks, of transformation that are happening at the same time. And we think that Picasso was like really good in catching all these tools and trying to implement them in his way of painting, in his way of presenting the images.
Yes.
So exactly, it's something that truly transformed the point of view of the audience.
So tell us about, I mean, we are literally sitting on a stage here. I am sitting looking at the edge of a stage where viewers who come to see this exhibition will be walking around to come and see this work and the other works in the show, but will be viewable to an audience that sits in a much more conventional gallery space on the other side of the stage. So tell us about that. Why did you want to put us on stage, as it were?
And a stage is a frame, and a frame is something that creates some limits about what can be seen and what cannot. So we also wanted to answer to the question of why Picasso nowadays, and how a collection of, not only a Picasso's collection, but how a collection in the museum or the contemporary institutions are done. Which are the lacks, which are the things that we miss when we are presenting something. It's actually really important to understand it. So we wanted to actually create a small détournement, a small like change of the way of looking that present in a literal way, the literal way of creating a stage and a scenery that present that some of the things that we are presented are not radically the truth. They are not the way that Picasso must be shown. This is just a way of creating an instability in the way of seeing Picasso's. Picasso can be presented in really different way, and it can provide us the tools to understand that there are possible ways that we are maybe not always exploring. So this is what we wanted to create, an inside space and outside space. We wanted to create, like, in a radical way, a break between the way of seeing the things, and this is a way of reflecting and thinking about like how institutions are behaving while showing artworks.
Right, and when you say about institutions showing artworks, also in relation to Picasso himself, you're not ignoring that there are significant problematics relating to him as a person, as interpreted from today's perspective. Also, you're not ignoring the fact that the museum is a problematic space in certain ways in relation to his work and the way it's presented in relation to artists from different parts of the world, which, for instance, Tate has started collecting and showing in much more depth in recent years.
Exactly. One of the main ideas that we wanted to think about when we were talking about like the idea of institution is that the main idea of collection has a really colonial roots, or a past that is really connected with the police archivals when the register, the archives of the persons were important to have a kind of control over societies. We wanted to implement this idea in the idea of like approaching to a collection and in the ways of presenting it. And we wanted to try to also read that one of the main importance of keep on showing and keep on thinking in Picasso's work is that it brings us a lot of tensions and contradictions that we need to think about. So we try to set some seeds of contradiction, problems that we wanted to bring into the stage, into the scenery. The idea was not trying to look to the other side, but presenting all these contradictions, because these contradictions, in some ways, are constructing our proper way of experiencing art nowadays.
Right, absolutely. And I guess, therefore, lastly, what you're really arguing for is greater complexity rather than framing him with simplistic notions of what he represents today and what he did represent in his own time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and one of the bigger complexities probably is that Natalia, talking about this painting about the three dancers, was really talking about the contradiction in a new life, bourgeois life that Picasso was living in the 20s years of the last century. But when Picasso was starting his life in Paris, he was a migrant, a Spanish young boy that was living with the anarchist circles, and he was was living like a kind of déclassé, an outsider. And I think that this contradiction, it's leaning in all his works, in all his ways, and it's really connected with the idea of high and low culture that are not terms that we approve or nothing like that, but we think that they are productive. This is the sense of performativity that we were trying to apply to this exhibition. How all these identities that are built in tensions are actually really useful to understand like why Picasso is so controversial and why we need to keep on rethinking in a critical way the work of Picasso, because he was conscious about like all these contradictions, and you can feel it. We try to do some of these tricks that we're talking about, like how to do that. For example, in the section of the painter of the model, we try to get the hands lower of the traditional measures to have a real contact with the eyes of the model that are looking to not only to Picasso, that is the painter, but also to you, that is the audience, that is like re-watching and re-experience all these contradictions. So we wanted to make them obvious in some ways.
Enrique, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Theatre Picasso is at Tate Modern in London until the 12th of April 2026. And that's it for this episode. The podcast is produced by Alexander Morrison, Philippa Kelly and David Clack, and David's also the editor and sound designer. Our social editor is Kelly Foster, and our designer is Daniela Hathaway. Thanks to our guests, Mark and Nikita, Gabriele and Natalia and Enrique. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Easily search through personal files, gain valuable insights, and make smarter, more informed business decisions. Unlock the future of work today with the HP AI PC with Intel Core Ultra processors. With the right tools, work doesn't have to feel like work. To learn more, go to hp.com/AIPC.
If it feels like your phone hasn't changed in years, maybe it's time to change your phone. Ask more of your phone. Google Pixel 10.
Ah, Benny's parents, thanks for coming.
Hiya.
So, Benny has really blossomed this term.
You're telling me? He outgrew his bike. We sold it on eBay.
Oh, that's not quite what I meant.
It's free to sell on there.
Free to sell?
Easy too. Sold Benny's bike, your guitar, my jacket.
You sold my guitar?
Shall we talk about Benny?
When it's this easy to sell for free, you can't help but say when it's eBay. Things people love. T's and C's apply. Excludes vehicles.
Here's the truth about AI. AI is only as powerful as the platform it's built into. ServiceNow puts AI to work for people across your business, removing friction and frustration for your employees, supercharging productivity for your developers, providing intelligent tools for your service agents to make customers happier. All built into a single platform you can use right now. That's why the world works with ServiceNow. Visit servicenow.com/UK/AI for people.
Hey, it's Theo, Luke and Joe from the Waffling Podcast, and our podcast is currently sponsored by Audible. Want your next thriller fix? Check out The Dropouts, the debut novel by screenwriter Liv Parkinson.
Kaylee Morris is just trying to survive her first year at uni, a blur of social anxiety and parties. But when she becomes the talk of the campus, Kaylee retreats and shuts herself away.
That is until she is chosen for a new module to try a new psychedelic drug believed to cure anxiety. But soon, the line between reality and fantasy begins to blur, and she feels the pull of a new dangerous obsession.
Listen on Audible now. Subscription required. See audible.co.uk for terms.